Okay, welcome. So this is prompted by the post videos comment. So I thought I'd do one. So a little bit of background. I am not a keyboard player. Surprisingly, I'm not. Background, I'm 55. I started playing when I was about 8. I had twin and manual organ lessons when I was really young. I started off in a band at 13. A friend of mine basically turned up and said, I've got a guitar for my birthday, there's a 3/4 bass in the pawn shop, do you want to go ours and start a band? That's how I got into music. So I started off as a bass player. I joined the military when I was 17, 18, and you can't play bass on your own, so I picked up guitar. And I've primarily actually become a guitar player for most of my playing life, and a mix engineer. I do a lot of mix engineering. I've always had a synth around though since the late 80s, normally just one at a time, and it's normally been a workstation variety. I had a second-hand D50 to start with. I've had an X3. I had a JD800 for a while, which was obviously not a workstation, and a JP80. I had a Phantom S for a long time. And when I turned 50, I told myself I was going to learn to play piano. Purely self-taught. And that's when I picked up this baby, my first board. I'll go into the whys and wherefores in a minute. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a run to my tiny room. Obviously limitations in size means I can't bring in gear that I probably would, although that is going to change, and some of this will go and will be replaced by other things, and some will stay. So I'm not really going to do any lot of playing. Might show the odd sound, but I'm not going to do a lot of playing. This is more just about how it all fits together and what I've got, and we'll see where it takes us. I'm going to start off on this side because this is probably the side that is of less interest to you guys, being a synth forum. However, so primarily guitarist. So there's a PRS Custom 22. There's a Tom Anderson Cobra with 3 P90s, which I love. There's a Martin 0028. There's a custom Fender Strat. That's got a nice flame top on it. A cheap bass for recording bass. So onto the bottom end. We'll do the mundane stuff first. Come out of the way. So primarily for playing guitar, that's my Fractal Audio Axe-Fx. Excuse me, my hands just fell off. My Fractal Audio Axe-Fx. I've been using that for about 15 years now. There's a line 6 relay system on the top. That's fine. There's a little solid state power amp into the back. Underneath my desk there's a 2x12 cab, which is how I tend to prefer that than FR, but I can use FR. Under there is also a sub, a Neumann KH750, and there's a pair of KH120s, which is my primary loudspeakers. Headphones, as far as music goes, there's an AKG K271 and a pair of HD 650s on the top there. Everything into the PC runs through the Scarlett. There's a little headphone amp there for the HDs, which I kind of need, and there's a little interface for recording there. I use Studio One, and that works really quite nicely into the monitor. So everything goes into here for the audio interface. The Axe-Fx goes into there if I'm recording into a couple of channels. There's a condenser mic up there that runs in, and I've got the 2 free here if I want to put a dynamic mic, or I want to record my acoustic guitar. The channels are then fed from 2 different racks. There's an 8U, a 1U 8 channel line mixer under each rack. So all these feed into this, and all these feed into that. I am going to just have a quick look behind here before we go into the synths. In here there's a couple of little tricky things hiding under here. There's a Moto Micro Express MIDI patch bay. That runs along with a couple of, there's a MIDI merger there. There's a MIDI merger down here somewhere. I'll show you that in a minute. Let me just hook that up. Yeah, there's another MIDI merger down there somewhere that I use to do my routing. There is also some isolated DC power banks there. So one power socket in, and that then powers all the modules because they're all barrel connections, and the MIDI patch bay, and a couple of other things that I use live. I use a mic mechanic and a couple of other little bits of kit live. More mundane stuff before we go into the actual hardware. I think this is all important. Foot pedal underneath. So yeah, 5 there. Hang on, I'm just trying to hold the camera steady. So from right to left, you've got these 3 here, all Roland DP10s. They're really good quality damper. They have a switch mode and they have a continuous mode. So playing piano, you can use half damp. So that's really good. This one's quite a cheap one, but it's just a switch. So this one here, that is a damper for my stage piano. We'll go into what they are in a minute. Next one is actually, I'm using this as an expression pedal because it's in continuous mode, but it's sprung. So it returns to 0. So that's really useful for things like aftertouch. For boards that don't have aftertouch or poor aftertouch, I can use that. Anything where I want to add something and then take it off without having to worry about a rocker pedal, that's brilliant for. This is just an expression pedal unsprung, so I've got the 2 options. This one's a cheap switch, basically Leslie speed for when I'm using organs, and this one is another damper that goes into the second board, which is the brains of the outfit when it comes to synths. Okay, so what have we got hardware wise? The bottom board is a Roland RD2000. So that is what I bought myself when I wanted to learn piano. And I wasn't overly concerned about the sound at that point. I mean, I wanted good sound, but I wasn't, you know, I'm just going to stick that up there while we have a chat. I didn't want the absolute best necessarily. What I was interested in was the action. Realistically, this has got the best action piano I could find, with the exception of a Kawai MP11. But that is quite a big beast and it's ridiculously heavy. If I was ever going to go gigging, which I am now doing, that wouldn't have been an option. So the RD2000 is my stage piano. Primarily organs, primarily pianos, electric pianos, clavs, those kind of things. It's got the German grand expansion on it. It's really quite nice. EPs. Anyway, so that's the RD, that's the stage piano. Next one up is my Phantom 7. This is the brains of the live rig. It has some deficiencies. Aftertouch isn't brilliant. It does work. People will tell you it doesn't. It does work. But it is quite hard to press, and it is quite a steep switch between high and low. It's okay if you want to apply some vibrato, kind of no vibrato, bit of vibrato. If you want a little volume lift or something, you're not going to do filter sweeps or anything daft like that, which is why I use that pedal. So the main purpose of this is the brains. Some of you will know the system, some won't. 16 zones. Each zone can be an internal sound or an external sound. Hence, it's used for all the modules. You can switch in a number of ways. You can switch using the sliders here. You can use the pads. In stock mode, I have it in pads, and just 1 to 16 is basically channeled to 1 to 16. So if I wanted to go onto one of the synths, that's an external. As is that. Or an internal. or another internal. Every zone can be split any way you want on the keyboard. You can use switch groups, so you can use these pads instead of just being a single zone. Each one can be a combination of. So live, it's actually a really good live board. If you were just using a piano and a synth, you wouldn't need half of that, and you might go for something like a stage or a Yamaha. The Montage and the Mo DXs have definitely they've got more arps on them. They've definitely got better acoustic sounds, your brasses, your strings. But I'm more of a synth boy, as you can tell. And the synth engine, the Zencore, and the models that are based on the Zencore engine, I think are probably the best you can get on a workstation type board at the moment. Yes, the Mo DX stroke Montage can do some nice synth sounds, uses FM to do it, and it can do it. Yes, the Kronos is still decent, and it has kind of VA engines on there. They're not as nice as the Roland's. Now, okay, it's got a Roland flavour, but you have, so this is a Jupiter. It's based on Jupiter 8, so is this one. This one's based on that one's based on a Juno JXP8. Sounds nice. If you get into strings, so this is their stock string sound. Loads of different strings, but they're okay. Brass sounds. So good enough for a band, which is what I play in. As I said, if you were primarily after those acoustic sounds, I may well have gone with the Yamaha, but the control of everything is not close. So what else have we got? So top left, this is a peak, an Ovation peak. So digital waveforms, including some wavetable type sounds and an analog filter. It was the first real synth I got. I was looking at that or the DSi Rev 2, and that one out predominantly on price. That was on a deal, and it was about £300 cheaper than the Rev 2, and I went with that. Now, I still use it. The reason why it's still in my rig is I use that live. This top shelf actually goes with me live most of the time, and it has some downsides. It doesn't respond to CC7. So unlike all the other things where I can control the volumes with the sliders, that doesn't. I have to control it manually. It's a bit of a pain in the bum. It sounds decent. There are other things that probably sound better now in the hybrid range. The third wave does, although that's not available in module. The Super 6 is possibly better sounding, if not as versatile. And when the project I'm in that I use it for folds, that will probably be on the chopping block when I move into a bigger space. But it does sound. Just flipping through some sounds. Decent organ. For a synth. Go down here somewhere. That's the aftertouch on the Phantom. It's not great, but for subtle things like that little volume lift and that little vibrato. So 3 oscillators, no dedicated sub, 3 oscillators, sine, triangle, saw, square stroke pulse, and the more gives you some more digital waveforms. Mixer with noise, filter 12 dB or 24 dB, low pass, band pass or high pass. The effects are really quite nice on this. The reverb's lush. Delay's good, chorus is nice. Core waveform's okay. It's not the nicest sounding, but then there's some VCOs in here you wouldn't expect it to be. Quite versatile. If it had that CC07, it might not be on the chopping block. We'll see. Next to it is an Access Virus TI2. Old by today's technology. Some people say it sounds plasticky. Might be right when you're talking for an analog, but for live, where a lot of the customers don't care, they don't understand, all they want to do is hear a sound. It is very versatile. 16 parts, multi-timbrality, if you needed it. It has that mid 90s to kind of late 2000s club sound that it was all over everything at the time, so it does have that archetypal sound, and if you're covering those songs, it hasn't gone away. It does reasonable VA. The Phantom's better, the Novation's better, but it does do things that they don't do. Modulation wise, there's loads of modulation on it, more than even the Peak, and that's got loads. One thing I didn't say about the Phantom, the way it generates its patch, you've got 4 partials, if you can think of them as 4 oscillators. But the good thing about it, or bad thing about it, depending on how you look at it, is each partial has its own signal chain. So every oscillator has its dedicated filter envelope, amp envelope, LFOs, two LFOs. So while you can simulate using Zencore, not using the models, using Zencore, you can simulate a typical synthesizer architecture, twin oscillators into a single filter. You just edit the filter at the same time and it duplicates the settings. Actually, you can have every oscillator can have its own filter, not just filter envelope, its own filter. So for sound design, that's unique. I don't know of anything else that does that. There are synths, the Virus being one, has twin filters, and you can assign oscillator 1 to one filter and oscillator 2 to the other, so you can do the same thing on a 2 oscillator level. Phantom, you can do it on 4, and not only has it got its own filter, you've also got its own envelopes. It's really quite, in that respect, it's quite good. So yeah, so the Virus does have a sound of its own, and it is getting old, and yes, it doesn't sound as good as a modern analog, or any analog, or a modern VA. It just doesn't. But what it does do, in a band context where that's less of a problem, and the polyphony, 100 and whatever it is, note polyphony maximum, spread across layers. So the Phantom for the more kind of Roland, traditional 80s Roland sound, and this for the more modern hyper saws, club sounds, along with the ability to do VA as well to an extent. Live with the polyphony, yeah, it's great. And that's why it's there. So again, much like the Peak, when the live, as I get older, my hands stop working so much. As the live falls off, that may go. So next to that we have my organ module. Now there is an organ on the Phantom. That was bought before the tone wheel organ came to Phantom. And live, this is probably good enough. that's the Phantom. If you go into, let me just go to tone edit. You've got the drawbars on the screen. You've got the drawbars here. If you're fast, you're slow. You've got your vibratos on there, on or off. Your soft and slow, and your thirds. So it's okay. The Legend, however, it's not working. That's because I'm not there. Okay, got nothing. I'll look at that in a minute. I was playing the other day, I probably pulled something out. I'll just check everything's in connected correctly. I'll find out in a minute because I've also got it set up here. I should have checked all this before I started, shouldn't I? Okay, I've disconnected a link somewhere, a MIDI link from the top board up there, but this is from the bottom, so I know where it's going to come from. So this is from the RD, but it's still playing the Legend. Maybe it's not. Okay, I'll worry about that because I'm in the middle of doing this. I can't just stop and do stuff. It's not coming into here at all. I'll just reboot it. It might start. It might just be a connection. However, Legend Expander by Viscount. It's the same engine as on the big, the Solo and the big Twin. Can have twin manuals, and I have got it set up so this plays the lower manual and this plays the upper manual, so I can do that. But yeah, that was bought because there was no virtual tone wheel on the Phantom at the time, and I did need a decent Hammond. Will I let it go? Maybe. Maybe not. Again, if I'm not playing in the band, I'm not as big a Hammond player, and the Phantom one is probably good enough. But it's, there we go. That was just frozen up. So that's the Legend. Okay. My hands, I'm not a Hammond player. Okay, so let me just check that the rest is in view because it might not be. So then we head up top. Now up top is my analog poly rig. On the left we've got an OB6 and on the right we've got a Prophet 6. Now my first full analog VCO, I had a Deep Mind for a time, DCO. But my first VCO synth was my Prophet 3, my Pro 3, which we'll go over in a minute, which might be on the chopping block. We'll go in a minute. And I did notice the sound, so that took me down to the AB6, which I got second hand, was on a deal. The Prophet 6 I bought when the prices started going up. I thought, I'm going to buy one now while I can afford it. They're both nice. They both do what they say in the tin. VCO, analog, polysynth. So the OB and the Prophet on the other side. Don't make something wrong because that's on 000. I obviously did something at some point. So the Prophet on the other side. Generally more delicate.
So why not an OB8? Why not a Prophet 5? Apart from the fact the OB8 isn't available in a desktop, the P5 is. I like to bake my effects into my patches. I use, although they're not the best effects in the world, and if I was recording I probably wouldn't use them, effects are generally part of my sound, and I don't want, especially live, I don't want to have to run them through another effects. So the P6 is fine for me, the OB8 and the OB6 is fine for me. Limited modulation with one LFO, that's where the top box comes in. We've got it on there. The top box up there is the low frequency expander. Very few of them about. Basically it's a MIDI control unit, and you go into here, then to your synth, and there's a feedback to here, and this adds 3 LFOs, a complex envelope, so it's a 6-stage envelope, not a 2-stage envelope primarily. There is a sequencer on there as well that you can use, and it just means you can, and the destinations are anything that is MIDI assignable from the synths. So on the synths itself you've only got so many destinations. On here you've got more, so things that you can't assign the LFO to on the synths you can on the LFA. Just opens up sound design, and it's a useful bit of tool. So that's that rig. Let me come over to this couple over here. So here on the top we have, let me just set this down here, and let me make sure we can see things. Go. So the top board is my Pro 3, first analog one I bought. It is really nice. It has the sequencer on it, is multi-lane, so you can sequence everything, not just notes. You can sequence filter sweeps and animation lanes on there. It's a really fun bit of kit, and it sounds glorious. The problem is I don't play mono very often. Even when I'm playing lead sounds, I kind of want to play a double. And some of you will say that it is paraphonic, and it is. So there's some paraphonic sounds up here. Not that one though. So you can do some. It sounds lovely at what it does. I'm not convinced it's going to keep. So yeah, unsure long term, because I'm more of a poly guy. There's no getting away from the fact that when you want to play just a single lead line or a single bass line, it sounds better than even the Prophet and the OB. But it's just I don't use it that often. Can it justify its place? Don't know. I'll have to think about it. On the bottom we have an Iridium keyboard. Now let's pause that. So the Iridium keyboard. Why I bought this? Polyphonic aftertouch. I did have a Hydrasynth which also has polyphonic aftertouch, but the Hydrasynth is a lot more limited in sounds. It's cheaper, and I didn't like the feel of the keybed. And I don't mean playability, I mean the actual feel of the keys. The underside were rough. I found that they weren't cut very well. You could tell where things had been cut in manufacturing to cut costs, and I've been an engineer, I don't like that. So VA, for those of you who don't know, so you've got 3 oscillators, but each oscillator can be one of 5 different engines. Those being VA, wavetable, FM, resonator, which is like assuming it does bells and hits and things like that, physical modelling. And there is also granular stroke sampling. So it does lots of things that none of the others do, which is useful to have. Now the 3 oscillators, so you can mix. You don't have to use them as a twin oscillator analog. You can use a VA in one and a resonator in another and a wavetable in third and mix them. So that's really useful.
there's also 7 oscillators, sorry, 7 part of oscillators in each oscillator. I'm not making myself sense here. Now let's just go through it and in it, and I'll try and quickly. I don't really want to get into this, but I can quickly kind of show you what I mean. If I go into there, whip down to, okay, so let's go for an initial. So my initial patch is set up with 1 oscillator in a VA situation, but you have kernels, and the kernels are other oscillators, and what you can do is expand them out. So if that's 1 kernel, so if I go to 2 kernels, that's basically, and then detune, that's basically now a twin oscillator detuned. Let's go to about 9 cents. So that's now basically a twin oscillator sawtooth detuned. If I bring in another VA oscillator 2 with sawtooth on 1 kernel and detune that by the same amount and bring it up in the so that's 2. So that's 1 oscillator, 1 kernel. That's using 2 separate oscillators with the same waveform detuned. Or you can go to 1 oscillator, 2 kernels. So as long as you want to keep the same waveform and you just want to detune them, you can do it all in one of the actual oscillators, and that can go up to 7, 8. So you can get your super saws in there. So that's really useful, and yeah, so then you've got wavetables. Etc. The FM is it's a 6 operator FM. It's like DX7, and you can load DX7 patches in here. I have got some. I've got to find where the best way to go and find them though, because they're right up the end. The only downside here is it's not in banks. It's like in a list of thousands of sounds. And although you have favourites, you can populate 6 banks of 16. 6 banks of 20 even. That's fine, but if you want more, you can't. If I go all the way up here, something okay. So these are original, DX7. They're all DX7 patches. High brass. They're all DX7 patches. So let's have a look at there. So that's TR8S. So straightforward. Straightforward drum machine. I've actually got some kits in here which are, oh, what's going on there? Don't know. Levels changing. I want that to change. Yeah, so there are some kits in here that are, that's doing some weird MIDI stuff as well. I'm sending it something. I've obviously did something at some point before I start recording, because all the MIDI's gone to
hence why the legend wasn't working, and neither was something else. Let's try that. Let's see if that's now working. I don't know. It's still getting something weird. I'll look at that in a minute. But TR8S, and over here I have a Hapax, which is a hardware sequencer, basically 16 channel per pro, 2 programs that you can toggle between, so up to 20, up to 32 tracks, and you can load from memory one while using the other. So actually you can have 16 tracks, load the next in the background, move to that one, so that gives you 32 tracks, then keep playing those while you load Bank A again. So effectively it's unlimited. Each track has 8 different patterns. Go and have a look online. Really good bit of hardware sequencer. Now, these MIDI mergers and things, they are set up so that basically I can play any sound source from any keyboard. Literally. So any of the synths up there can be played by any of the keyboards. So polyphonic aftertouch into an OB6, no problem. Polyphonic aftertouch playing the Phantom sounds, no problem. And Phantom does respond to poly aftertouch. If I need bigger frequency range, I can use the Phantom keyboard and drive the Iridium, literally anything. I can use any keyboard to record into Hapax. Hapax can then play back any of the synths. Hapax has 4 MIDI outs, assignable. So one goes to the patch bay back there, so I can play any of the top synths. One goes to the Phantom, so I can play any of its 16 tracks. One goes actually via the TR8, so I can sequence the drums on here if I want to, and then into the RD, so I can play the piano sounds. The Pro 3 has 2 MIDI outs. There's a merge there which merges the Iridium and the Pro 3, so that they go into the MIDI patch bay as a controller. The RD and the Phantom both have MIDI outs, 2 MIDI outs. So the RD goes to the Phantom and the Phantom goes to the RD, so they can play each other. And then the second outs go up to the patch bay, so either can then play any of the other synths, and then back through. So it's all quite complex, but it works really well. I don't think I've missed anything. That's 38 minutes. That's actually not too bad for the amount of kit that's in here. So what might be going? Right, so because of the space, because I need the RD and the Phantom for live, that has to stay. That doesn't leave a lot of space. I can't fit a 5-octave keyboard in here. I could put a 5-octave keyboard up there, but because I've used the Virus and the Peak for a long time, there's quite a lot of live patches on there, so I don't want to lose those. So as it stands, I'm quite covered. The only potential movement would be the Pro 3. That could go. I could move the Iridium up. I could get a Super 6 in there. I could get a Trigon 6 in there. Any 4-octave board pretty much. But when I move to a bigger room, and I've got no more width restrictions, I'm going to go to 2 3 tiers. So that's a 4 tier. The top tier is usable, but you have to kind of stand while you're doing it, and then if you're playing piano seated, you can't. It's hard to reach up and manually do things. It's workable, but 3 would be better. The bottom 2 are going to stay because that's my live rig. The 3rd tier would stay until the current project collapses, because they all do eventually, and then I will stick to the bottom 2, and those will probably go. The top boards, the OB6 I'll probably keep. The Prophet 5 6 I might keep, I might not. A Super 6 would fit in there in modular form, as would a Trigon 6 as and when it becomes available. I've no doubt there will be one. That's kind of what I'm thinking, or I could keep that one. I don't know. The other rig this is where the change will be predominantly. So the Iridium will, or the Pro 3 will probably go. That gives me then 3 tiers to play with. Either the Moog 1 or the Polybrute. Now the Moog 1 obviously is more polyphony,
but it's a lot more expensive, and it's basically 3 cents in one. So if I could afford it, probably, more likely the Polybrute. Now that's not going to do things I can't do already, but the modulation capabilities on the Polybrute and the Moog one is a lot more than the sequentials up there, so that's why the Polybrute. The Iridium will probably go, and will probably be replaced by the Quantum Mark II. And the reason behind that is the Quantum Mark II is 5 octaves, which I prefer, and that has the same poly aftertouch keyboard, which was the main driver for the Iridium in the first place. And it adds some analog filters. So while it's still hybrid, it's got no VC or DCOs. It basically gives me everything that the Iridium does, plus an extra octave key range and the analog filters. It's probably will be the last thing to change of this rig, but that will probably happen. And the third synth to come will probably be the third wave. It's dedicated wavetable, and yes, the Iridium stroke Quantum does wavetable, but it sounds glorious. Having played one, it does sound really good, and the VA stuff sounds good. And if peaking does in fact go along with the virus, when I streamline, having 24 notes of polyphony in VA that sounds as good as the third wave does, and have the dedicated wavetable, that's likely to happen. So that third rig, so we'll probably end up with an RD, a Phantom, the OB6, and an IN other desktop module, whether it's the Prophet, whether I keep the virus, whether I bring in the Super 6 or a Trigon, don't know. Then the third tier will be a third wave, the Iridium or the Quantum, depending if I upgrade to the Quantum, and then the bottom board will either be a Polybrute or a Moog 1. And I think that covers most bases that I will ever need, to pretty decent quality standard as well. So, just stick this back up here just for a minute, and hopefully you can still see me. So yeah, 40 minutes in, more of a rundown of the space and what I use. I wouldn't worry about, there's a pedal board under here which is for the Axe effects. It's basically patch changing and bringing effects in and out on the pedal board. There's also 2 pedals under here. Same, they're not DP10s. They're the same as the switch I use for the Leslie, but they're basically dampers for the Pro 3 and for the Quantum, for the Iridium. Anything else I've forgotten? Probably not. That's pretty much everything. So yeah, not a lot of playing, a lot of waffle, but hopefully why things were chosen, and how it all fits together. So yeah, hope you enjoy.